The Flyer, written by Oliver Arnold, performed by Adam 11 Labs.
Dear listener, I touch everything with nervous anticipation. The intense energies blasting my body with every new transmission worry me. If only the author sent warnings ahead, I could prepare. Yes, I have received another broadcast. According to Rovelli and Tegmark, time is an illusion. There is no yesterday or tomorrow, only the here and now, all at once. If true, why is it that I hear from what we call the ahead? Doubt overwhelms me. What if these notes reach me from elsewhere? Could the reports be disruptions by the subterraneals? Or is our own government sending them to lure me out of hiding? Possibly, but I must take risks. The reports are crucial and must not be suppressed. My friend, I hope you appreciate the agony and danger I suffer for your education. I have decided to continue publishing these accounts despite the dangers for myself. I am hunted. Draw wide open the world's eyes, I must, and show the travesty that's our future. I imagine this summarizes the sender's intent. I wonder if the originating language is English. The text offers no indication of the ethnicity of the future's inhabitants. Could the world be headed toward a single, unified race, language, and government? What a terrifying vision for those of us who frequently disagree with their own administration.
Beginning of transmission. It had been some time since I had traveled any distance on any planet. After decades on the space station, I was very much used to minor expanses where everything happens per peds. Now, walking in a city on Terra the size of everything dizzied me. A tall sky, colossal buildings, the crowds, and heavens, the ads. At Airborne Al's, the wheels came off years ago, a giant screen stated while flashing a rolling car about to break down. You! An on-screen crowd shrieked. It's touching the floor! A TV family of 5 shouted as the children held their noses. A bald and bold man with a floating hat entered the screen. Do you want your car touching the ground? The man, presumably Airborne Al, asked, pointing at a doo-doo that, judging by the tire marks, a rolling car had just passed through. Do you truly want to bring the outside's filthy ground inside with your personal vehicle, a transport that will be parked in your garage at your home all night? Al continued, while taking away the conclusion by shaking his head. Of course not. It's unclean. It's disgusting. At once, the on-screen car's tires popped and deflated with an obnoxious noise. Escape the rolling pains. Enter the flying age, Al said, delighting the on-screen family. Their soiled garage, overgrown with weeds and inhabited by worms, turned into a space so clean the family decided to have a picnic on its floor. Feel newborn and get airborne, Airborne Al's. I watched the ad, not comprehending. Why would anyone need a vehicle when they have perfectly working legs? I thought to myself, striding along the sidewalk. I had made good way, was well on time for my interview, and my mood lightened. Then I reached a street crossing. The light was red, and I joined a group of waiting pedestrians. I stood out as the only person who wasn't carrying a bundle, a wrapped bundle. My fellow pedestrians sported small, wrapped hunks of mysterious purpose. Waiting, I peeked at the wad that a woman carried on a sleeve around her neck. It was an infant. I smiled at the lady and at her treasure, but only received a harsh glance in return. In retrospect, she didn't appear like a fresh mother in her business suit. To my other side stood a lad, who too carried what looked like a baby carrier, though perhaps he was a bit too young to be a parent. Now get this, he held the very same infant. Our light turned blue, and we crossed when, out of nowhere, an autonomous vehicle appeared and zoomed toward us, apparently out of control. The car first headed toward the woman and baby to my left, then changed course to target the lad to my right. In an instant, the vehicle veered yet again, and at the last second, swayed to shoot directly toward me. Frozen like a headlighted deer, I awaited my end when the unthinkable happened. With lightning speed, the lady tossed her baby between myself and the car, causing the vehicle to brake harshly and saving my life. I felt relieved and horrified all at once as the vehicle's occupant rushed out to my aid. "What on earth, sir? Where's your fake baby?" the agitated driver yelled. "Heavens!" I replied, trying to rise while slipping on plastic shards that were scattered all around. "Fake?" "Yes," the lady shouted. "Do you live behind the moon?" Space station, hoch, I replied, clarifying. In front of the moon. I then learned that these days, all of Earth's pedestrians carry plastic babies to fool the autonomous vehicle ethics engines. In delicate traffic situations, these algorithms make split-second decisions as to whom or what to hit. A baby raises your score, rendering your life more worthy than others, thus putting an unbabied walker at a dangerous disadvantage. Luckily, the friendly driver gifted me her spare newborn, and I was back on my way. The experience had cost me 30 minutes. How many other unexpected delays awaited me? It became clear that my habit of walking everywhere would be too slow and dangerous on Earth. This presented a formidable problem. I possessed no personal conveyance as yet, but had to find fast and safe transport. I stopped at a map to study the public transportation options. Rails, tubes, tunnels. With a healthy dose of skepticism, I viewed a subway schematic, remembering this mode of mobility as going from where I wasn't to where I didn't want to be. As I traced the subway lines with my finger, a raspy voice addressed me. Underground rails have been offline for years. A hologram had snuck up from behind. Are you not from around here? It then asked impolitely. I didn't feel like answering, but said, Hawk, without turning. Space Station Hawk, the hologram said. I can see that. I only now realized that I still wore my spacesuit. I turned and beheld the projection of an oversized man wearing a muscle suit and a floating hat. It looked a lot like Airborne Al. Why don't they work? I asked. Aliens built the tunnels. When they vanished, no one understood the technology behind the train system. No one could operate it. Then how do people get around? Glad you asked, old chap. There are alternatives. I glanced over at the station. Sure enough, the doors were boarded up. I stared alternately at my watch and the blockade. Dang, I'd missed my job interview for sure. I should mention that in-person interviews are uncommon in space, as your employer may be light years away. On Earth, though, missing a personal interview is considered a slap in the face. When I called my to-be employer, they told me that if I hadn't shown up already, I needn't show up at all. Great. I was ready to give up on Earth. When I turned, the hologram was still there. Sorry for that, it said, sensing my desperation. Here, this information will cheer you up. It began raining surprisingly tactile and adequately named flyers. Tired of being grounded? The pamphlets asked. Visit Airborne Al's Flying Machine Market. I checked my bank balance and felt Virtual Al's hungry stare from behind. We finance anyone, Al's hologram said. I was anyone. A flying car could get me anywhere on Earth faster. It would reproduce the floaty magic of the space station. I nodded to myself, both desirable. Freshly energized, somewhat confident, but no less eager to put my transportation problems to rest, I ventured the next morning to Airborne Al's dealership. As I approached the building from afar, I stopped and pondered the peculiar way it was shaped. Round and domed, it was formed like a donut, or you might say a wheel. Surely my mind tricked me, and this was no roller, but instead some hover-related donut-shaped technology I knew nothing about. I walked on. But then, what if this was a wheel, and I had been tricked again? I recalled my ordeal with the Earth shuttle. I stopped. This was confusing, too confusing. Was a hover car truly the solution? My solution? Just as I turned to walk off, a hologram came running out of the building, waving its arms and yelling at me excitedly. Wait! Wait! Shouted the overweight holo, gasping a bit too much for an aerial aberration. After the hologram caught up, it blocked my way. Please wait! Begged the familiar-looking image again. This time, though, I intended to ignore it and walk straight on. We collided, and I nearly fell on my back. Yes, it was the real Al. Only my hair's fake, Al hollered, chuckling, pausing. Well, that, and my muscles. But then, what self-respecting salesman doesn't wear holo hair and a muscle suit these days? He laughed loudly. I looked him over. Beside the fiber-optic wig and ridiculous muscle suit atop his fatty self, the man wore a builder blazer, a garment made from an excitable light-up material. Slogans and images flashed across his arms and legs. Intelligent transportation, one slogan said. So, Al, what's so intelligent about your hover cars? I asked. I'm not Al. My real name's Frank. Al, who wasn't Al, said. Okay, I said. Then why not rename your store to Floatin' Frank's? This confused Frank greatly. He twitched. It's not Frank, it's Al. I left it at that. Right, I said. So you're selling artificially intelligent flying cars? Yes, and the finest. Frank paused. Mostly. I laughed uncomfortably. He nudged me toward the building. I'm glad you were ahead of my other potential customers. How's that? I asked. You made it here, Frank said, gesturing here with his hands. I shrugged. I don't follow. Despite our dreadful public transportation, he gestured at a decrepit bus stop. You reached me. How did you do it? I walked. Walked? Frank fell to his knees as if pleading with the pavement itself. You too much, my friend. Where from? The moon? From in front of the moon, I said. Right. Come inside, Frank said, leading me through the door with a friendly but firm hand on my back, and make this your last walk. And with those ominous words, we entered the showroom. I remembered my thin wallet. So, Frank, I only have 100 bitbucks. 100! He thrust his arms high in the air and jumped around the room. Embarrassed by my inadequacy, I motioned to leave. Noticing this, Frank shot ahead with a lightning speed his figure shouldn't have allowed. My friend, that shouldn't keep you from acquiring reliable transportation, as long as my name's Al. He nudged me into a chair. All right. One cannot have great expectations at that budget, but I like a challenge. I nodded gratefully. I must think harder than I've ever thought before, Frank proclaimed. How do I help this man? I'm very grateful for your effort, I said gratefully. Frank nodded. You were looking for a flying car? Flying. Right. Flying cars must never be confused with frying cars, he added pensively. Too many delicious accidents. Frank shook his head. We offer a special program for those in need. More of a charity, really. He grabbed me by the shoulder, and down we went into a windowless hallway. Are you aware of the intricacies of AI-driven vehicles? Frank asked me. I nodded. One nearly killed me. That's a great start. I mean, it can't get much worse from there. They can be a bit, picky, you know? I had heard about that. In our time, you don't select your vehicle anymore. The vehicle selects you. Similar to horses in the past, these intelligent machines have minds and needs of their own. Imprinted with animal-sourced desirable traits, such as ardor, confidence, and zeal, the moody digital brains would not function if their owner wasn't to their liking. These intelligences are held to the highest standards, Frank continued. Not the smallest flaw is permitted. That also makes them expensive, highly expensive indeed. Every once in a while, there's a slightly devious, he halted, quickly correcting himself. No, not devious, malfunctioning. He stopped even harder. No, not malfunctioning. Moody system that may or may not have gotten along with its previous owners. I nodded, like this was all common knowledge. Al, whose real name was Frank, continued. As a manufacturer, what do you do with such systems? He didn't wait for my shrug and said, the car's controller chips cannot be reflashed. They're fused to their AI forever. His eyes wept. So you gotta find them a loving home. He blew his nose. Do you have a heart for lost AIs, mister? I think I do, I said, stammering. Great. Certain flying cars require that special someone. Now, some of our special vehicles were sometimes not completely compatible with their previous owners, Frank continued. We arrived at a showroom. It was devoid of cars, but full of tiny cubicles with people in them. Large roll-up doors were on both sides. In front of the cubicles ran a conveyor belt. Al caught my questioning glance. We are showing customers, not vehicles. He grinned and opened a cubicle for me to enter. I couldn't see the other customers, just the conveyor belt in front of me. You're lucky it's early in the morning. That increases your odds, Frank said with a grin. I sat down in the bare bones box, and after some time cars came rolling by to inspect me. Some younger ones took all dignity out of the experience, honking and hooting at me and the other prospective owners. Vroom, vroom, floor me, said one, honking. I got all excited by the attention. "Let's fly off together," said another before adding, "Not." Sometimes multiple cars were interested in the same driver, thus reducing those vehicles' prices in this auction-like system. A really cute car came by and flashed its headlights, but after I got excited, it sped off, honking. Yet another cruel joke. When my frustration mounted, I remembered that all these were troublesome vehicles, most without permanent homes. No wonder they behaved like this. After hours and hours of cars shunning me, I remained the only customer left. Frank came in. "Sorry, buddy, we're closing." When he saw my sad face, his heart melted. "Well, I don't want to close without selling you some. I have an idea." I lit up. "Well," he then said, "it's clear that you can't afford an original flying car, nor that these troubled ones would ever take you. That's why we need to lower our expectations." "This isn't the bottom?" I said, slightly panicked. Without replying, Frank led me to a windowed door with another showroom behind it. There, one lonely car idled, dinged, rusty, with a design of times past. "Old Rita here has been a victim of abuse." He nodded toward the car behind the glass. "Really sad case. Went from homelessness to joining a gang involving illegal racing." We went inside. I felt deep sorrow as I approached the vehicle, touching her fender gently. "Hi, big girl. How are you?" I asked. After an initial pullback, she managed to blast a feeble La Cucaracha from her horn. Frank struck an upbeat tone. "Presenting Rollin' Rita. She's a wheeler that's been converted to hover," he boomed, but then added more quietly. "She ain't flying like the young'ums anymore, but still plenty of life in her." I gently smiled and then asked Rita, "When were you built?" "Been around the block. Data problem?" Rita asked in return. "Not at all," I said. "Where you from?" she now asked me. "Space station. That a problem?" "Nope," Rita said. Her door popped open. I took a seat and revved her up. It felt good. I fed a $5 down her tip slit and whispered, "I'll always buy premium energy for you." My words found approval. "Oh, yeah. Surface ointment weekly?" "Yes." "Movies and fly-throughs?" "All right." We had a deal. After finishing Frank's paperwork, Rita and I were out the door and off the lot. It was near commuting hour, an excellent time for a test. As we shot into the sky, a large flock of cars emerged all around us. They streamed from alleys and openings around buildings, garages, and driveways, public car parks, and apartment towers, glistening in the setting sun. It was beautiful to behold. And that's how I met Rita. We hit it off right away. Her easy ways, wit, humor, and positive attitude made me wonder why she had been abandoned. I didn't dare ask. Not this soon. Sure, her capacitors were oily and her shifting grindy, but why not give this old-timer a second chance and save a buck or two? A few short days later, we had already fallen into a routine, and the day's early hours were marked by joy. Waves of commuting vehicles would flock into the skies in playful waves, excited to be out and about again. It was a magnificent sight, but everyone had to get to work, and I had to make it to another interview on time. When I gently nudged Rita's controls, I sensed a resisting pressure. "Let's take the scenic route," she said. "I feel so alive." "No, Rita." I gently cuffed the throttle and took control of the yoke. "We must fly to my appointment." Rita's dashboard happiness gauge soured, but she gave in. I felt sorry. How could I not? Our time together seemed to instill such jubilation into Rita's crumbling capacitors. I have to admit, the thought of shooting into the sky and toward the space station was seductive, yet duty called here on Terra. "I promise we'll go on a long flight soon," I told her soothingly. That seemed to help as I sensed the steering trim ease. Upon exiting once again, I encountered resistance while opening the door. "Stay with me," Rita intoned. "We're having so much fun." "I'll return in a few hours," I said, patting the dashboard but also removing the key. Rita's face soured once more. "All this time I'll be alone?" she asked. "Can I at least fly around and go places?" "I think it's best if you stay here, in case I need you," I replied. Her face went from unhappy to sad. "Very much. I added. Her mood indicator improved. Also, Rita, the insurance isn't fond of long AI solo trips. With so many good points, she must have understood my reasoning. Yet Rita returned to her frown, and the doors opened only reluctantly. But within a few days, we had found our groove. The car hummed and made its way briskly to our varying destinations. Things moved so smoothly that I often had trouble staying awake at the wheel. I felt that my attention was vital, though. I still wasn't 100% sold on Rita's commitment to reach an agreed-upon destination. Luckily, traffic signs in our time are adorned with nudity to catch a human driver's attention. Despite it all, one time I nodded off. A harsh sweep shot me awake. The driver beside us had flipped her off with a pinch circle and 2 fingers. I wasn't up to date on hate gestures, but the man's face revealed displeasure. Our cars engaged in a shoving contest, cutting each other off, pushing, flashing, and honking, but Rita soon withdrew. I was proud of my old car, the sense of responsibility that showed, although the event brought up a zealous side of her that I hadn't yet witnessed. One evening, I had filed up on our office tower's roof for the evening's vehicle commuter pickup. Flying cars came, retrieved, and zoomed away at blazing speeds. Soon it was my turn, but no Rita arrived. I hailed her on my communicator. "Rita, you're late. Is there a problem?" I asked, but received only static in return. I held up the pickup line. My colleagues became restless, and I was forced to give up my place. Back inside, I once again called her on my comm. She wouldn't respond. Only an hour later, when all others had long left, the communicator crackled, and her voice sounded from my wrist. She was outside and ready for service. Needless to say, I wasn't pleased. "What held you up so long?" I barked angrily after slamming her door shut. "I've been on a mission," was her surprising reply. "A what?" "Hunting crooks for the authorities. Vroom, vroom, bang, bang." I was stunned, confused, angry, and tired beyond the ability to argue. We left it at that. While such were episodes of Rita's zeal, she also sometimes showed incredible fatigue. Another morning, we stood outside the garage, and Rita had trouble taking off. "Why is everyone going so fast these days?" she asked as her old demagnetized coils whined. My eyes followed the other cars, zooming by with a heavy heart. I had no answer. Among an awkward silence, Rita huffed and puffed like what I understand was called a steam engine to finally get off the ground. We were not aloft for a minute when she spoke. "Why are you tapping the yoke?" she asked. "Is something the matter?" I hadn't noticed my impatient drumming and stopped. "No, nothing. I'm just into the beat." "The stereo isn't on." "It's in my head." We ended it there. "Look, an Ferrari!" I shouted, pointing at an exotic sports flyer passing us, grateful for this distraction. "Those are always going too fast," she said. "Also, everything keeps getting hotter and brighter." I was on the phone with Franks that night. "At this age," a guy from the shop told me, "she won't fly much anymore." Not exactly what I wanted to hear, but not an unexpected verdict. At 40, even with regular maintenance, Rita is past her usable life. How could I talk to her about this? Or should I silently ignore her increasing deficiencies? Lead her to pasture? The question rose in urgency the following day when this happened. I had just entered her, and we began the pre-launch sequence when Rita asked, "Why don't we take off from the roof today?" I was both surprised and irked. I had a busy day ahead of me and no appetite for shenanigans. Upon my inquiring why we couldn't launch from street level, as we always did, she gave a surprising response. "It's boring." She's right, I thought, now realizing that we had fallen into a dull routine. Why not mix things up? "Go up and have a time," I told her, and the car enthusiastically shot into the vehicle elevator. The 2-minute ride up the 500-story building allowed me to contemplate my reservations for the upcoming adventure. It didn't help that, even as the elevator did the work, old Rita creaked, gasped, and wheezed all the way up. We usually stayed low during our commute, hovering just above street level. The rooftop launch was a monumental departure, both literally and figuratively. My neck hair stood up as we reached the building's upper rim, where few other commuters flew. A brisk wind blew, and I closed the windows. Clouds covered the view below. This was the domain of superfreighters, megacruisers, and orbital entry vessels. I gulped. "I'm gonna zoom out just between those two megatugs," Rita announced with an enthusiasm I didn't share. Her servos screamed. "Yeah, safety first, right?" I cautiously said. "Let's live a little," Rita proclaimed. "Live a little longer." And just like that, she shot over the roof's rim. At first, she went straight out and made great way. Impressive, exhilarating. But then the trajectory plateaued, and we dropped like a concrete-filled buoy, like a pallet of Olympic weights on Jupiter. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God," her bow pointed straight down. We had too many close calls with too many mega-haulers, one very fast orbit entry vessel, and my friends from Ferns. We wobbled in what I assumed were Rita's attempts to stabilize. The ground stayed deceptively far away, though I knew that by now we were at terminal velocity, 30 seconds max before impact. Rita's coils whined loudly. I knew she didn't want it this way and that she tried everything to level out, gain thrust, and gain control. "Maybe it's time to deploy the chute?" I cautiously suggested. "No, I can—" Okay. The rest of her reply came out jumbled, as Rita must have been rerouting all power to her failing engines. I smelled oil, failing wire, and singed plastic. When I reached for the ejection lever, I found the door locks engaged. Had the mechanisms failed, or had Rita manipulated them? The world turned to streaks. I felt light in my seat and pressed my eyes shut in anticipation of the impact. How ironic that I should have survived so many of Earth's perils only to perish inside, not in front of, an autonomous car. A sudden G-force pressed me back into the seat. I saw stars. My stomach turned. Surely I experienced death, yet when I dared a peek, we were unsmashed and horizontal. Rita had, just barely in time, brought us around. We were floating safely en route at a lazy 30 meters altitude, along other old-timers, and continued our commute to work. Neither of us brought up our brush with destruction. "See you later," Rita tweeted through the comm after she dropped me off. Was all I could muster in reply. Rita was just out of sight when I called Frank. "Seen this 1,000 times," the man said. "Nothing to worry," he told me, and he advised me to just throttle her regulator tonight when she's charging. "Won't she know I'm doing it?" I asked with suspicion. "No way," said Frank. "The controllers deactivate all sensors during charge. It's like they're sleeping." "And after I throttle her, what happens?" "She'll be the same, but calmer and more manageable. A totally common tweak we do in our shop every day. It's simple. Do it yourself and save some." That sounded like an excellent solution, and after terse instructions from a tech, I understood the steps needed. That night, I waited until Rita's whirring indicated that her coils were charging and snuck into the garage to perform the procedure. It only took a minute, but I couldn't tell if I'd done it right. There were no gauges, displays, or indicators. I shrugged, crept back out, and retired to bed. Things didn't improve. We often argued about even the smallest decisions. The car would buck at red lights, often going overly fast and then braking hard when I was just enjoying my morning covfefe. During stop-and-go traffic, the machine would frequently accelerate and brake more harshly than I thought was necessary. Our relationship turned bumpy, literally, as she would take on every magnetic speed bump or force field she could find. Often it was small things like Rita cranking up the radio to a program I didn't enjoy, with me having to beg to lower the volume. I must have appeared like a student driver, and I didn't enjoy looking like a fool to my colleagues in the parking lot. I could no longer take this moodiness. Again, I called Franks. "Listen, I must return, Rita," I whispered. There was a pause. "Can you imagine what this will do to her mental health?" I'm not sure if there's much health left to damage." "Why don't you give this old-timer a third chance? Have you no heart?" Frank asked. Suddenly, 2 honks came from the garage. As always, Rita needed something. "Listen," Frank said in a soothing manner, as if I was crazy. "You can disconnect her emulsifier. That removes all passion." A Rita without passion. Was that good or bad? "Okay, I'll do it," I said. After the instructions, I went to Rita to see what she wanted. This time, it wasn't a coil change. "Have we experienced everything?" she asked moodily. Do you ever wonder if there is more to the universe than what your 300 sensors can sense? I knew she was charging, unable to experience much of her surroundings. I quietly opened the toolbox, retrieved the cable cutters, and closed in. Rita continued. Sometimes I wish we were incapable of sensation, that I was blind and deaf to the evil world around us, she said. At that point, I had located the blue box with the 4 large black screws just to the right of Rita's port side wheel well, her emulsifier. I was about to snip the thing. But then I want to live and experience, Rita suddenly said. I paused and stopped. I couldn't do it. The next morning, Rita wasn't in the garage. She must have figured out how to disengage the door-locking mechanism. Cleverly devious. I felt nothing and found another way to commute. That evening, when she returned, neither of us mentioned her absence. I didn't much feel like commuting or even communicating with Rita, so I took a cab to work the next day. I did, though, leave the garage unlocked as a message, secretly hoping that she would go on one of her trips and not return. That didn't happen. I returned from work to find her not home, but later heard the garage door screech. The following morning, I quietly stole past the garage. Rita was in there, charging. I spotted her through the door crack. Would you like to ride me to work this morning? She suddenly asked. Dang, her timer still worked. Sure, I replied, both surprised, pleased, and less stressed after these days of standoff. Rita flew at a reasonable clip that morning. We stayed low, near street level, along with the rolling cars. Yet others did not go at our leisurely pace. On the rear monitor, I observed how a bulky yellow hunk of metal with wheels sped up very fast, only to zoom past us. I only caught part of its black lettering. District. Yes, it was a school bus. The driver rudely cut into our lane, and I had to hold back old Rita from retaliating. The driving didn't improve and went beyond what I believed these vehicles could do. This was all the more surprising as we were headed toward the notorious Deep Devil Canyon, a ragged, arid, and yawning landmark that had for years been used as a battery dump and was now filled with acid. This maw had claimed many rolling victims due to its location just behind the road's bend. This is not right, Rita noted, and I could sense her throttled breathing. She was dying to speed up. Dunno, I said, squinting. Inside the bus, children by the windows wildly gesticulated. They were having a blast or morbid fear. Let's shoot by them, block the road, and investigate, Rita suggested enthusiastically. I'd rather you contact the authorities, I replied, hoping she wouldn't override my authority. It took her only a second to respond. The closest peace enforcement cruiser is over 5 minutes away. I suddenly became uneasy. Was Rita falling into old habits? Had crazy taken her over? I knew not what she planned, and worse, I had no way of intervening. I cursed myself for allowing her to lull me into this drive. Maybe stay out of this one, I suggested, but our acceleration increased. Something's not right, she replied, huffing hard. Let's check it out. She must have noticed the unease in my voice because she added, I won't do anything crazy. Pinky promise. When that still didn't bring about my enthusiasm, she added, I'll pick you up right on time tonight with a freshly scented interior and a kiss on the cheek. Her humor didn't put me at ease, but perhaps you're sane if there's a funny side left in you. We had caught up with the bus, and Rita's passenger window rolled down. Climb out and see, she said. You must be joking, I said. We were going 120. Why don't you hover up a bit? Can't. All my power into forward thrust. She paused and then said, Do it, and I'll leave your life forever. Why would I? I stopped. Lying was useless. I hesitated, but then said, Deal, and climbed over to the passenger seat to squeeze myself out of Rita's narrow window. I balanced between the two cars to see into the driver's side window of the bus. The pavement was a blur below. I watched as thick drops of my sweat hit the road and vanished instantly. At this speed, everything around me was streaks. Unfortunately, that included the bus's interior. The window was too dirty. I began rubbing it with my shirt. Imagine tiptoeing on a speeding car's window ledge, leaning over to another speeding car to wipe its dang window. Just then, Rita's floating coils surged, and she jerked. I barely held on to the bus rear-view camera. "You trying to kill me?" I yelled. She didn't answer, but I could tell she was laser-focused on steering. I had achieved nothing. The bus still didn't deviate from its course and didn't try to correct its route. I looked ahead. The canyon came up. I could already see it. The children were doomed. "Try opening the driver's door!" Rita yelled. I did, but the cockpit was locked. While the vehicle's inside featured an emergency exit mechanism, there were no overrides to enter. We had 2 minutes before the bus would shoot over the cliff's edge, Rita calculated. My mind raced. Suddenly, a noise from behind thrust me out of my terror. "Mama!" I felt pressure on my rear, and I remembered my backpack. The plastic baby was still in it. When I looked ahead, I could see the canyon clearly now. Its far end vanished in the fog. "Pull 20 feet ahead," I instructed Rita while climbing on her roof. She didn't ask why. "I feel so alive," her rusty speakers croaked. "Yeah, but you're not," I thought to myself, and pulled the toy baby from my rucksack, whirled it in a wide arc, and then tossed the artificial human farce in front of the bus. Unfortunately, the yellow vehicle ran right over it, crushing the doll into 1,000 pieces. I despaired. Had the bus's AI gone insane, much like old Rita? Perhaps the two mad computers could communicate, with Rita giving advice from one crazy machine to another? Rita must have sensed my confusion. "School buses are driven by people," she proclaimed. "What?" There were attempts at school bus automation, but artificial intelligence was soon removed at considerable cost to the taxpayer. But why? To this day, it remains unclear whether the little punks had hacked the controllers, Rita continued, or if the unit's always-on microphones couldn't compute the kids' unending poppycock and went mad. Insanity, tell us about that, I thought, but kept it to myself. "Let's examine the cockpit from the front," I finally shouted with newfound resolve. I didn't have to tell Rita twice. The car tilted her engines, prepped the throttle, pre-charged the capacitors, and shot laterally. At this point, the pavement ended and a rubble road began. Not that this mattered to a hovercar, but the rolling bus started to sway. The thrown-up gravel pinged the bus's deflectors loudly. I climbed onto Rita's hood. Finally, I was able to see through the windshield inside. There, slumped over the steering wheel with his foot firmly on the accelerator, lay the driver. I held up my communicator for a quick visual diagnosis. "Choked on a super sub sandwich," my comms display advised me. "What to do?" "Jump across and drive," Rita commanded with a rigor I could not believe. I had one quick and embarrassing reply. "I don't know how." "You serious?" How dare these rusty old wheels question me? Full of hurt anger, I nodded and leaped. I had barely lifted my foot when old Rita bolted ahead until she was nearly at the canyon's edge. She suddenly hit the brakes and spun into a 180 turn to face the bus head-on. Without delay, she fully throttled forward to head toward the bus until they touched. It worked. Her momentum slowed the giant yellow tube, but its overwhelming mass pushed her back. I began kicking the bus's windshield. Only a dozen feet of road remained behind us. The canyon's acid bubbled hungrily, and the first spritzers fizzled on Rita's rusty bumper. But old Rita wouldn't give up. She rerouted power from the radio, the seat massager, and the mini fridge. She audibly disengaged the floaters. I heard an aged capacitor pop. "I can make it," she called as her rear was pushed past the canyon's edge. But now, with reduced flotation, her chassis began grinding on the ground. Bits and shreds of her floaters flew off. Fortunately, the additional friction slowed us further. "You'll plunge," I yelled into my communicator. "No biggie. I'll just levitate," Rita replied. She had forgotten her failing floaters. Rita's pushing slowed the bus, but there were only a few feet of gravel road left. It seemed impossible, and I fully expected us all to perish. I remembered my sunburn the other day. I didn't like the sensation. Would dissolving in a corrosive substance be worse? Rita struggled terribly. "Lift his foot off the gas," she yelled. Right, I recalled being on a mission as well. I shoved off the driver's lifeless limb, and instantly, the vehicle's powerful forward momentum slowed. Rita had reduced the bus enough to keep it from the edge, but there was no room for her. The last bit of the bus's momentum pushed her over, and down she went, out of my view. I vividly remember hearing her anti-grav whirring. Any second now, she would rise back above the edge. But all that rose was putrid vapor. My call to her was answered by crackling. "Rita, come in, old lady," remained unreplied to. It struck me then that this must have been her plan all along. The kids' raucous cheering forced me out of my stupor, and a smile appeared on my face. So grateful they were. When I ventured back into the cabin, I realized they had paid no attention at all. They amused themselves on their digital bit buddies, playing games and cheering someone's high score. "Are we home yet?" one brat asked. It was for the better, I assume. "No, we're not, son," I replied. "When we gonna get there?" he asked. I had no immediate answer, but after a second's rumination I did. "Very shortly," I said resolutely. "Everybody buckle up." I engaged the electro-whips and took the helm to firmly steer the vehicle back to town. How? You can't drive, you may now say. It turns out that line skipping and school bus driving have much in common: shoving, pushing, and wedging. Due to my experience, I had a knack for it. The superintendent wasn't surprised to see the dead driver. "Third one this month," he said, shaking his head. "Those damn school cafeteria subs." Much gratitude came my way, but I remained politely quiet. I knew that the true hero was the old car at the bottom of the acid pit. "How are you going to get to work now, sir?" a boy who knew nothing about me asked. "Without a car and all?" I shrugged. Just then, my communicator beeped, and I received notice of my firing. Missing this day of work hadn't gone unnoticed by my superior automaton. All this effort for nothing. The superintendent noticed my sadness. "Son, I think I may have a solution here." Yes, he offered me a job, and you'll never guess, as the new school bus driver. I couldn't be happier with my new line of work. A well-paying job I love, serving the community, and my problem of commuting all solved at once. How? Simple. I sleep in the bus. I often think of old Rita whenever I hear a popping capacitor or out-of-phase lev magnets. Why must we these days infuse curious minds into everything? I shall report more on the subject sometime. End of transcription.
And thus, the transmission ended. Allow me to now state an update on my situation, as you, dear listener, are my last hope in case I disappear, much like my AM radio equipment did. I have made arrangements for a wooded seaside property for increased privacy and access to the ocean. Surrounded by many acres, I will start the construction of an ark. This one, though, will only save a single species. Me. Don't panic. I have plans for your liberation as well. But for now, I must hide in the deep, dark forest like a frightened animal before I thrash the sea like a shark. It is so quiet. Do you sometimes feel like the world is merely in your head? Soon, the where will matter no more. The future is for those who know how to wait.
The Flyer, written by Oliver Arnold, performed by Adam 11 Labs.